So my 2-year anniversary since I first laid hands on the GFX100s is coming up in just a few short weeks, which piqued my interest in making this video all about my 2-year experience with using a medium format camera exclusively for landscape photography. Now, it's definitely not a perfect solution, as there are quite a few things about the system that I guess I wish were a little bit different. But nevertheless, before planning for this video, I hadn't gone through all the pros and cons I experienced with using a medium format system, so I was very much looking forward to putting all the details down on paper and getting them together for those that are contemplating a similar switch. So I broke this video down into 3 simple parts covering the pros and cons, along with the perceived hurdles that ended up not really being obstacles that I had to, I guess, overcome during my 2-year experience. And these are those things that I thought would be, I guess, real issues, real problems that I'd have to solve for, but they ended up really not being any problems at all. So I was kind of surprised by a lot of those. But as far as just, the overall pros are concerned, perhaps the most obvious one is just the overall image quality. So this particular medium format camera, the GFX100s from Fuji, it's 102 megapixels. There's a ton of resolution in this image, or in this camera. But besides the overall resolution, the image quality is absolutely fantastic. The detail is incredible. The tonal range is very smooth in this photograph. So the transition from the lighter tones to the darker tones throughout the histogram is very, very smooth across this sensor, which is absolutely beautiful. The images edit very, very clean, very smooth. So it's very, very nice. And the high ISO performance, I mentioned this in last week's video that in modern day cameras today, you can shoot with extremely high ISO levels and still come away with very, very clean photographs. And this camera is no different. Now, this is the only medium format system I've ever used, but I can easily shoot at ISO levels of 1600 or 3200 and even 6400 sometimes and still come away with insanely clean photographs. So the ISO performance on this is absolutely amazing. But perhaps there's 2 main things that I love the most besides just the overall image quality, but one of them is the amount of shadow recovery that you can resolve. So I can easily underexpose a scene by sometimes up to 4 stops. So to get as much detail in the highlights or to get as much detail in the sky. And I can underexpose that 4 stops and easily recover all of that in the shadows in a very clean manner. And I think that's absolutely fantastic for one main reason. One is it's great to always have a lot of dynamic range, but the other part is that I really no longer have to bracket. I actually have not had to bracket one scene in the last 2 years since I've been shooting exclusively with this camera. I can get everything in a single shot. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. I don't love blending images together. I really like to try and get everything in a single photograph as often as possible. So being able to underexpose a scene by so much and still pull out as much shadow detail as I want in a very clean manner is absolutely fantastic. So that is one of the things that I love the most. But the other thing is just I have the ability to crop in an insane amount. I mean, 102 megapixels across this sensor is a ton. There's a ton of resolution here. And I, for one, love to be able to at least have the ability to crop, because I don't always get the composition right on location. So sometimes I have to do a little bit of composition refinement in post, and sometimes I have to do a lot of composition refinement in post. So just having that ability to do that is absolutely fantastic. I shouldn't have put this down for this next part, but I love the way that this feels in my hand. I have bigger hands, and this camera actually has an L bracket on it, so it adds even a little bit more of a beef or a little bit more heft to it, but it fits very, very well in my hands. I love the ergonomics of it. It just feels really good. Some of these cameras today are so small. This right here is my Fuji X-T4, and actually the L bracket I purchased to put on here actually has an additional kind of bump that kind of adds more, I guess, mass to this grip, just so my larger hands can fit around it in a more comfortable manner. So I actually had to make this camera somewhat larger to feel a little bit better in my hands. Now, granted, I think weight is extremely important, but a lot of times these smaller cameras or these cameras are getting so small to where they feel a little bit uncomfortable in your hands if you have larger hands. So those are really the main positives, the main pros that I've experienced over the last 2 years, the things that I love the most about this medium format camera. Now, as far as the perceived hurdles are concerned, these are the things that I thought were going to be challenges because when Fuji first announced this camera, I did a lot of research to figure out, the pros and cons they are the more common pros and cons to using a medium format system. And one of the biggest things that I came up with was the fact that this was 102 megapixels. Those are huge files. And I was afraid that it was going to cause a lot of issues for me. But in all honesty, it really hasn't been a problem. I shoot in 14-bit lossless format, and these files are always under 100 megabytes, and usually they're right around 85 megabytes, which is very manageable in today's standards. So that hasn't been a problem at all. The battery life, I don't know why. I really never read this anywhere. I just, in my mind, felt that it's a medium format camera. It's a little bit larger. It's probably going to use a little bit more battery. It really hasn't. The battery life has been very, very good. I can easily get through an entire day off of probably one battery. If I really pushed it and I needed to shoot like all day long from sunrise to sunset, which very rarely ever happens. There's almost always a break in the afternoon. But if I had to, 2 batteries would do that for me. But from my experience, I can usually get through a day's worth of shooting on just a single battery, which is very, very nice. Kind of going back to the file size, I also thought that the larger file size would cause me a challenge with my computer. So, I don't have the latest and greatest computer. I edit everything on a 2020 or maybe a 2019, I'll have to check, MacBook Pro. So it's definitely a few years old. It's not ancient, but it's definitely not the newer models. But I haven't had any issues editing these 85 or sometimes maybe 100 megabyte files. There's no lagging or jerkiness to editing in Capture One, Photoshop, or Lightroom. It runs pretty well. So that was a perceived problem that I thought I was going to have. And then the other perceived problem, and I kind of mentioned this a minute ago in the pros section, has to do with the size and weight of the body. Now, it's, like I mentioned, it feels really good in my hands. And it is a little bit larger. If I compare this to the X-T4, you can see that, yeah, the GFX100s is larger than the X-T4, but this is a crop sensor camera, not even full frame. This is medium format. And I think you would agree that the overall size difference is not drastic. It's not a massive difference. So the size of the body is not an issue at all. I feel like it feels. I think like it feels. Sometimes I just get so off on my speech, on the way I speak sometimes, but nevertheless, it feels very, very good in my hands. And the weight, no issue at all. It feels comparable to any other kind of full-size mirrorless camera, or a full-size or full-frame mirrorless camera, or full-frame DSLR. So really no big issue there. But as far as the cons are concerned, now the biggest con, not the biggest, the second biggest con in my opinion, no, not even, I guess this is the third biggest con, is just the fact that they're a little bit more expensive. Now, I wanted to quantify this. So this right here, this medium format, the GFX100s, the body alone is $6,000, which is a lot. The new Sony a7R Mark V is it's just under $4,000. And the Sony A1 body is $6,500. So it's actually more than this camera. So if I went away from the GFX system, and I went away from the Fuji system, and I wrote down some notes here. The system I would go with is probably the new Sony a7R Mark V, which is exactly a $3,900 body. And if I went out and purchased the comparable 3 lenses that I have right here for the GFX system, that would be the 16 to 35 G Master, which is $2,200, the 100 to 400 G Master, which is $2,500, and my mid-range zoom would be the 24 to 70 G Master, which is $2,300. That full Sony setup would cost $11,000. Now the system I have now, $6,000 for the body. This is the 100 to 200, which is $2,000. This is the 23 millimeter prime, which is $2,600. That's an expensive one. And then this is the 32 to 64, which is $2,300, which is a total of $13,000. So the difference is, the Sony setup would be $11,000. This medium format Fuji setup is $13,000. So I'm basically spending $2,000 more to have this medium format system, which equates to about, what is that, roughly maybe 18% more than the Sony system. So when you quantify it like that, yeah, an extra $2,000 is a lot. $2,000 is $2,000, but roughly 18% more. I honestly would have thought it would have been a little bit more. So if I went away from this system and wanted to kind of save some money, I would go with that Sony setup. And yeah, it would save a little bit, but it wouldn't be a massive difference. So I thought that was pretty interesting, but that is definitely a con, just the overall price of the system. And then the size of the lenses. These lenses are big. This is a 32 to 64, and the lenses, they're big, and they're pretty heavy. This is heavy. 100 to 200 is pretty heavy. The 23 millimeter prime, this is actually the lightest of the bunch, but it's still a heavy lens. But the size, I mean, they're big lenses because the sensors are large. It's a medium format sensor, so you got to have a lot of glass to get around that sensor. So it makes sense that the lenses have to be a little bit bigger. And then the other part of the lens issue is the limited lenses. You know, I'm a huge fan of a telephoto and super telephoto lenses, and this is the one that I have, a 100 to 200, which in full frame equivalent is like a, what is it, maybe like an 80 to 180, which is not very long at all. I would love a 100 to 400, but I get it. To make a 100 to 400 for a medium format camera, that lens would be huge or very heavy. So supposedly there's rumors that Fuji is working on something like that. So hopefully that will come to fruition. But in the meantime, this is my long lens solution, which is not absolutely fantastic. So the limited lenses, you know, that Fuji's coming out with, new lenses for the GF system all the time. I think they added 2 last year, and they're probably going to be adding more this year. So it is growing, but right now it is a little bit limited. But the biggest issue that I have with a medium format camera, and I'm pretty certain this is across the board with all medium format cameras, is the depth of field. It is a very shallow depth of field. Even if you're at f/16, it's a much more shallower depth of field versus a full frame sensor or a crop sensor camera. So the amount of times that you have to focus stack is usually pretty great. Now, I'm not one that thinks that every scene has to be sharp from the foreground to the background. A lot of times that natural fall off looks very realistic. It's how we see the world. And it also creates a sense of depth in a photograph. But there are some times where that fall off looks distracting or unrealistic, or it's not what I had envisioned. And that's when you have to focus stack. So with the 23 millimeter prime, it's such a wide lens to where I don't really have to focus stack too often, depending on how close the foreground is to my scene. But the 100 to 200 and the 32 to 64, if I want to get everything in sharp focus in a single image, or I should say just get everything in sharp focus, I'm going to have to focus stack that. So it's not a huge issue, but it is something that you have to be aware of. And I can't tell you how many times that I'm using either the 32 to 64 or the 100 to 200, and I'm not confident as to whether or not I'm going to have to focus stack that scene. I end up taking 2 or 3 additional images just to be safe when I get back in post. So if I have those additional photographs and I need those, I can go ahead and blend those together. But the shallow depth of field is definitely something that you have to be aware of. And if you're looking to move to a medium format system, you definitely want to, I guess, mentally account for that before you actually make that switch, because it is something that has to be thought about, and much more often than any other camera system I've ever used. So do I regret switching to a medium format system? Absolutely not. Like I said, there are some challenges, but there's challenges with all camera systems and all different camera sensors out there. You just got to kind of figure out what's best for your setup and your particular needs. But I think that the pros absolutely outweigh the cons for this particular setup. So I do hope that this information was helpful if you are possibly contemplating switching from your current camera system to a medium format camera system. Hopefully this video will help you out. I know when I was making the switch, I found that there wasn't a ton of information out there on switching up to a medium format camera, so figured that this might be able to help somebody out. If you have any questions related to my particular camera system or medium format cameras in general, please leave those in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to get back in touch with you as soon as possible. And if you did enjoy this week's video, if you could give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. If you're not subscribed already, share the video with your friends or your local photo club. I would definitely appreciate it. And as always, I really do appreciate you spending the time to check out this video with me today, or watch this video today. And I will see you all next Wednesday. Bye.